Hey TV fans, Bored now back with you. On this video I'm going to be talking about Star Trek Discovery Season 5, Episode 4. It is called Face the Strange. Full spoilers as always. So this is a time travel episode, really cliched. They don't do anything really that interesting with the time travel and the use of it. To sum it up, it just feels like the time travel gimmick in this episode is an excuse to have a bunch of cameos and reference a bunch of things from the show's past. It doesn't feel like it's doing that much which is relevant to the current season or progressing characters or the story. The big main thing is it's an excuse to have Raina and Michael together for the whole of the episode, because they are the only two, apart from Stannants, who are unaffected by the time jump in this episode. The time jump has been caused by Locke and Moore, because Raina has been once again pissing off the crew, like trying to tell them, no, don't speak freely. Michael takes him aside and says, this is not the way we do things. You're in hot water. You need to blend in a bit more. You need to engage more with this crew. The big reason why the time jump exists is so we can have an episode of these two together, so they can sort of hash things out and grow at the end of the episode. Just rather that happen naturally than having to have this gimmick of an episode where it just feels a bit contrived and forced. And at the end of the day, if Raina goes back to being his passive aggressive self in the next episode, then it'll all be for nothing anyway. And that's part of my problem with the writing of this series, this season, and with Raina, is at the end of the last episode, he learned something through his encounter with Tilly. He said at the end he could see value in them and he wants to engage in them. So he did learn a lesson then, but then it seems like he's just reverted back to type at the start of this episode. And I'm not saying you should do a wholesale change with him, because that wouldn't make sense, but it just feels a bit like he learns something and then he takes it back in as soon as you have a chance. And it's just so that they can have this excuse for him to go on this journey with Michael and then learn something again. And listening to them squabbling like kids, whereas basically it's not your way, this isn't the way, and just squabbling like teenagers is really painful to listen to and really grating. And I brought this up before with Raina, where he doesn't feel like a very interesting character. Like, the actor I like, and the actor always plays quite roguish, like outspoken antagonist, but when he's written the way he is in this, then it's just a very one-note character. It's an excuse to shoehorn cameos into the episode. Brief appearance by Saru, because it's part of the timeline where he's still a member of the crew before he's left Discovery. And that just feels like we've got Doug Jones in the main cast and we just want a quick scene with him because he's off doing his own thing in a different storyline. Character on the bridge, for example, in one time period reset to a point before the burn when the effects of the burn are different and the crew haven't saved the world from the burn. So it's that sort of thing where everything they've achieved over the course of the show is being written out of history, because it feels like they're just fixing a problem they've already fixed in the past. And they're not really using the time travel for anything new or fresh or interesting. Like, it doesn't feel a good enough reason to do a time travel plot. I remember in one of the time jumps, and it's when Michael has to convince them then she is from the future and that they've got this problem and they need to fix it. And you've got Stannants and Raina working together. And you get this crew member who's a robot, and I'll be honest, I don't remember her. Like, it's mentioned then in the past she's she died, she didn't make it to the future. And I honest to God don't remember her/it because it's a robot. And again, it just feels like an excuse for a cameo. Could have done with a bit more luck in the episode, because I don't mind them too much. But it's like, once again, there's not enough reason for this scene. Like, it doesn't really change or add anything to have it start in the past. As I said, that they're not using time travel for anything interesting. A good example of using time travel for like something interesting is an episode of Deep Space Nine, a much better Trek show. And that is, I'm not going to spoil anything about the plot really, but we see Jake Sisko, son of the captain, as his older self, played by Tony Todd, and he's a writer. A version of himself has to change something from the past, but the difference is it's something we haven't already seen, and it's new information, and it's done in a very inventive way. It's a really good episode. It's one of my favourite episodes of Deep Space Nine. And it's a great example of doing something fresh and interesting with time travel. And it's just a great character-driven episode. Getting back into the meat of this episode and some of the problems is that at times it feels like they're making stuff up on the fly and it's just convenient. Michael at one point figures out then this is because her and Raina were beaming somewhere at the time, so they missed out on getting caught up in this, and that feels like a really lame, convenient excuse. They could have come up with something better than that. That is really lame. And later on, she figures out that Stannis is unaffected because of his DNA, and again, I swear to God, I don't remember them bringing this up at any point during the show. Now, if they did, then fair enough, but I guess it just shows that this isn't the most engaging Star Trek show, and it just feels like a convenient thing. Probably the only other thing with that is, even if they have brought it up before, it feels like they don't really do anything with it. Enjoy the scene with Raina and past Reno, them meeting for the first time in that way is quite funny and entertaining, because he sees in her himself almost like she is this more straight talking, cocky, sarcastic figure, and he has to cover for himself being there because she doesn't recognize him and says he's like in training, and she tells him about, hey, I'll train you later at a cocktail bar, like best margaritas in the galaxy, and like they bond over like how you have a margarita. So that scene I did enjoy. Like, that was a good use of it, and I enjoyed Rena in this episode. I also actually don't mind past and future Michael meeting. You knew they were going to do this, but they do meet and they have a collision, and like past Michael's reaction is pretty funny because she's ready to beat future Michael up, and future Michael has to convince her and she's not having it. Past Michael doesn't believe future Michael, and part of that is because she doesn't believe that she would be captain, because she can see she's wearing a captain's uniform. And there's a lot of question marks over that, because first of all, Michael in this show has never really believed that she shouldn't be captain. I've not really seen that. I know she's had crises and a lot of question marks, and I can see how she has doubted herself, but I've never really bought, because she is quite a confident, like very at times egotistical person, which seems to be the point of the character. So I don't know, I find it hard to believe, and also it just feels a bit contrived, because when she's standing in front of herself in a captain's uniform, if anything, that goes to prove then she's probably Michael from the future, because if she wasn't, if it was some other reason like a doppelganger, like she mentions, then she would look identical to her. Those scenes are actually pretty entertaining, and future Michael has to knock her out temporarily with the Vulcan death grip. But there's stuff like that. There's moments that are quite entertaining, like their collision in the lift. Very pointless throwaway scene with Book in this episode. And once again, that feels like a cameo for the sake of a cameo, because what happens is Michael has to go to a quarters and fix something, add something in so they can use it to their advantage in the future, because it hasn't been invented at that point, which is fine. But then she bumps into Book and they have a moment, so it stands out. Then it's just an excuse to have a scene with Book, and it doesn't really add that much to the episode. They go into the theory of relativity, Stannance does, and it just feels like an excuse to shoehorn that into an episode. It just feels like they're trying to be really clever by using the theory of relativity, and that it doesn't really fit in the episode. Now, I'm no expert on it, and if they've got it down to a T, I'll give them some credit, but it just doesn't feel like it needs to be here. It just feels like an excuse to show off, hey, we're using the theory of relativity. And when Michael comes across this crew member who's no longer around in the present, and once again she's doing this whole thing about convincing them she is who she says she is, like she tells them a bunch of stuff about themselves that only she would know, and it's all this cliches that so many time travel episodes do. But she tells, I forget the name of the crew member, but she tells her how she's going to die. And immediately they don't believe her, because they say she would never do that. And then Alira or something like that, the character's name, says, I would if I needed to, if it was for the good of the crew and that thing. And that's fair enough, but I've got a problem with Michael breaking the rule of time travel. Then you don't say things, you don't reveal things about what's going to happen in the future, because she's doing that willy-nilly in this scene, and it's cliched, and it's just saying, yes, I would do that. That still doesn't prove that Michael's telling the truth in this scene, because it's not actual proof. And that's part of my problem with this episode and the way it treats these things. Is, okay, it could happen, like there is a logic there, but I don't think there's enough proof in the actual scene than Michael's telling the truth. Like, it's not actual proof is what I'm saying. It's something that could happen and there's a certain logic, but it just feels a little bit weak. Characters never seem to believe then it could happen, like, oh. And I know in this case it's because Michael's appearing to them in the captain's uniform, and they find out the other Michael has been knocked out, stuff like that. But still, they're part of the they're part of like a Star Trek crew, and time travel is in the universe. A couple of fun moments, but overall it's a pretty dull episode to watch, like the last one. And not a lot changes at the end of it. There's some really cliched lines. Rayner has some cliched lines, like when he says to Paul Stannance at one point, he says, hey, let's show them a couple of old dogs still have tricks, or something like that. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always, and share me out on social media. You can support the channel for just $1 extra at boardnow.com/patron. But thanks for listening. Keep watching Star Trek, keep watching TV. See you soon, guys.